Welcome back to the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael,
And I am James.
and today we are discussing the human factor, which is the second part or second episode of the first season of Dalek Empire, of course done by Big Finish, written by Nicholas Briggs and released August of 2001. And this episode runs for about 1 hour and 11 seconds, so it's exceptionally digestible. And before we go into it, James, if you wanted to just go over the plot quickly.
I saw on this plot is directly from the Big Finish website. Alby Brook and Gordon Pellan are following the best information they have to locate Suze in Dalek-infested space. But what is it the Daleks want with her? On the slave planet Garia, Alby discovers Suze is already gaining a reputation as something of an angel of mercy. Could it be that she is now working for the Daleks? But as Susan and Kalendorf travel from planet to planet, a murmur of defiance is growing. Death to the Daleks! Death to the Daleks! And that's a very fan-written plot in which it doesn't give too much away, but if you've listened to the story, you can make connections with the plot kind of ignores the connections because it talks about how they travel from planet to planet and there's a murmur of defiance. Well, those aren't completely disconnected as we learn listening to this episode.
Yeah, and this has a lot of the same elements as the first episode does. It touches a lot on the morality of what's going on, and there's some interesting discussions to be had. But beforehand, let's just quickly discuss the characters we have here. We have Susan Mendes, voiced by Sarah Mowat, Kalendorf by Gareth Thomas, Alby Brook, voiced by Mark McDonnell, Pellan, who is the guy currently traveling with Alby, voiced by John Wadmore. The narrator, who was also in the last episode narrating these events looking back, is voiced by Joyce Gibbs. We have a character named Morabe, who is credited as a David Sachs, but it's just a pseudonym of Nicholas Briggs. And he is one of the mini slaves under the Dalek system who tries to do a revolt just a bit early. And lastly, we have two characters who are sort of the leadership of Goria. And we'll talk a bit about that planet, and that is Highness, voiced by Adrian Lloyd James, and Daute, voiced by Georgina Caute. Neither one of them is an exceptionally big character, but I do think they have stand-up moments. So, this episode takes place 6 months after the previous one. So at the end of the last episode, what we had was Suze making a deal with the Daleks to sort of talking the people of Vegas 6 into sort of submitting to the slavery under the Daleks, with the idea that if they work under a shift system, it will make it more tolerable and they'll actually survive the enslavement. Suze's logic being that there's always hope if you can survive another day. And she is decent at this. She gave a pretty compelling speech that apparently worked. And the Daleks wanted to sort of use her, I'm going to say, as a spokesperson, sort of going on a tour of the enslaved planets, giving the same speech over and over again, just to sort of instill hope in the slaves and making them more efficient, which is the Daleks' only concern. And using, I guess, a sense of potentially saving these lives, even if it's been saved under slavery, sort of using for justifications as a way to increase efficiency of the slaves. And well, obviously, Suze is probably in a somewhat higher position than most other people, and she has direct contact with many in the Dalek echelon. We also know that the Daleks have some other type of interest in it that we still don't entirely know. So there's also something deeper going on. But it sort of serves both sides, is I guess my point.
Yeah, and we get to see the flashback where the Dalek Supreme first makes the offer to Suze, and Suze almost has a breakdown right there and then because she knows what's being asked for and she knows basically what it would mean. But the Dalek just uses her own morality against her, saying, well, do you want to save lives? Does this not save lives? And she's just crying, begging to be left alone, begging for the Dalek to not say her name. Or the Dalek's cajoling her, basically saying, hey, do this and you'll be able to save more lives. Now, of course, there's lives, as Michael said, or lives and/or Dalek enslavement. And I quite enjoyed it because Suze pointed out before she started really breaking down that it's not like the Daleks weren't smart enough to figure out the shift system themselves. They could have done it if they had wanted to, but they wanted a human to suggest it perhaps maybe for the reason of using them as a quasi spokesperson. Spokesperson really isn't the right word. If you've listened to the story, you know what we're talking about. She's basically placating all of the civilizations and planets she goes to into submitting peacefully to being enslaved by the Daleks, to not fight it, to just work their shifts, eat the food that they have, enjoy the time they have off, and just accept that that is now their lives, and that there's always hope as long as they're alive. Which, I know, it's just such a house situation, because we talked about the controller from Day of the Daleks and how he and the Third Doctor had a very, very interesting debate about the morality of what he was doing, in terms of basically, in some ways, doing the same thing, although he was in a little more direct control over his section of the planet during that Dalek invasion, whereas Suze is just more of a person going around to different places and not controlling the slaves. But either way, it's still working with the Daleks to ensure that the Daleks' needs are met. Because Suze very well knows the Daleks don't actually care if people have hope. They just want them to be efficient. And if the hope makes them more efficient, the ants justify the means for them in that case. So it's just a very complicated moral situation that Suze just finds herself having no choice, basically, but to go along with, because in her mind, it saves lives.
She can use that to leverage bringing a friend with her, being Kalendorf. Now, we learned in the last episode that Kalendorf is a former Knight of Felicia, and with that comes the ability to talk psychically to people if he is able to initiate some physical touch. And that's something the Daleks, to our knowledge, cannot receive. They can't intercept those messages. I doubt they even know he's a Knight of Felicia. I mean, if they knew, I'm assuming there'd be a much bigger issue. The point is that once Suze makes this deal with the Daleks to go planet to planet, giving this speech, sort of like a stamp speech really, she wants to bring Kalendorf with her, saying that, hey, if she wants to try to give hope to the slaves, she needs hope herself. Having a friend with her, being Kalendorf, would give her that hope. And, well, she has leverage. I know the Daleks say she doesn't, but she sort of does. And the Daleks do let her take Kalendorf with her. No, I like to think it would be their undoing, but there's also 4 seasons of this, so, maybe I'm being too hopeful. But like James said, as they go around planet to planet, the message death to the Daleks is slowly being ingrained within the slaves, and that is because Kalendorf, while traveling at Suze's side, is psychically passing that message along to many of the people he comes in contact with, growing a rebellion slowly, and over time you can imagine it can be quite a sizable force. It's actually not too dissimilar from, or what's it called, The Year That Never Was, the end of season 3 with Martha.
Yes, I forget which episode, maybe the last of the Time Lords, I don't know. But yeah, it's very similar to that year. And in fact, there's an entire book, which we're throw up right now, based around that year that never was, from the New Series Adventures, just entitled The Story of Martha, which is, I believe, 4 stories during that year for her. And this is very similar in the fact that it's a long-term goal. This isn't a rebellion that's going to happen tomorrow. It's not even going to happen in the next week, not the next year, maybe not in the lifetime of most of the people they're talking to.
I was going to say, that's the main difference. Because Martha had the plan, it's going to be a year. She gave everyone the time. But there's no, as far as we know, there's no type of time frame here. There's a character you mentioned, Morabe, who leads a revolt. And as he talks to Suze later in the episode, he's like, well, there's no guarantee this revolt's even going to happen in our lifetime, is there? And she says no. So, I mean, you can understand why even if there's a message of revolt being spread, someone might want to jump the gun a bit, and you can't even blame them. You might argue in the long term it's not a good idea. I maintain I'd much rather die than be a slave. So, I mean, that's just my view, not having been in that position. It's not an easy situation. Like James said, the morality here, I think, is sort of fascinating. As a matter of fact, if the Ortholand is able to fight back the Daleks and win, there's a very good chance that Suze could be convicted as under war crimes, sort of working with the Daleks. Now, maybe they'll take pity on her, saying that, oh, maybe she didn't have a choice, maybe they'll listen to her logic, but I feel like even I wouldn't be against her being thrown in prison for it, to be honest.
I mean, certainly there's a case to be made, especially if you don't know that she was working for mounting a rebellion. If they ran into her on a Dalek ship in a very comfy room, and granted, we didn't know if she has a comfy room, but we did see that she was able to talk back to Daleks, And because she's on this mission with a direct mandate from the Dalek Supreme, the Daleks she gets to talk back to, on the whole, actually listen to her. Which is funny to see. At one point, she's berating a Dalek, saying, "And who are you supposed to listen to? Are you supposed to listen to me and the Dalek?" They're hesitating because they don't want to say it, but the answer is yes. And it's very rare to see that type of dynamic between a human and a Dalek. And if anybody from the outside saw that dynamic, yeah, she's going to be certainly arrested and questioned for her place in this invading Dalek Empire.
Especially if Kalendorf dies, since he couldn't back up any of the things that Sirius might have been working on him with. They'd be in even worse position.
Yeah, I do wonder what Kalendorf's place in everything is, because you're right that the Daleks almost certainly don't know he's a Knight of Felucia, but he brought it up himself that he has spent his entire life being a child of a lost empire when he was talking to Morabi, trying to convince Morabi, I mean, it's too late at this point, that now wasn't the time to do a revolution. And it's so easy to say now it's not the time when you're not the ones directly suffering. And like, we could get into all sorts of current geopolitical things right now. But at the end of the day, I don't know if we can criticize the people for wanting to rebel or rebelling as they did. I think they killed 50 Roboman, and they actually caught and tortured the Dalek who was on this moon around the planet they were at the start of the episode. You can't blame them for it, even though long term nothing was actually going to come of it. It's just such a complicated situation. It's a very morally complex situation that I'm not surprised this story has nothing to do with the Doctor, because I don't know what the Doctor would do. Because the Doctor would be just a fly in the works bringing up the entire Empire or something. And depending on the Doctor, this is the type of thing that most Doctors would have a lot of trouble with. Just going with the flow until you can actually figure out a way to and actually have a revolution.
Yeah, and for more information, you can watch Season 5 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. There is a quote from Kalendorf that I felt was quite succinct in displaying this, being, "It's not a question of right or wrong, it's about survival." And that is what they are trying to do.
And for more information about Season 5 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there's actually a lot of similarities right now. And it's funny timing that we're listening to this while also currently watching a reaction to Season 5.
So Morabe and his men did successfully kill 50 Robomen, and like James said, they captured and tortured a Dalek and eventually killed it. But like we said, it's too early. There's not enough people in on this revolt right now. It's not time, and this is pretty much doomed to fail. So we have the Daleks, who as soon as this other Dalek was captured and its casing was broken, they sort of sent an alert to the Garrison Central. So they sent a bunch of Daleks out to go while the rebellion, and in fact Suze was there too. Like James said, Suze is not without some influence. So she wants to try to speak to Morabe first under the guise of trying to make him end the rebellion peacefully. Like she says, yeah, they need to be punished, but maybe they don't need to be killed. And the Daleks let her go talk to Morabe alone. And this is what's really fascinating. So Kalendorf was already there, and he was alerted to the situation a bit earlier. But as soon as Morabe and Kalendorf talk, and Suze probably knew this from the beginning, but Morabe is sort of in the position where he's started this rebellion, and even though Suze is there ostensibly to tell him to stop, doesn't really have a choice. Because if they give up, they're going to be tortured, and they may in fact reveal what Kalendorf's end goal is. They may reveal the long-term plan. So even though they are doomed to fail, keep in mind they took, I forget how many minutes it took to just take out a single Dalek, but Suze has like about half the forces died from a single Dalek. So I mean they have no chance to defeat like the 50 or 100 that are now surrounding the moon. So Morabe and his people literally have no choice but to fight knowing they're going to die. Now to be honest, some of them may prefer that. And Morabe lost his entire family to the Daleks and then submitted, which he feels constantly guilty about. Like I say, I blame him. So maybe going out in the blaze of glory honestly might be profitable to, it's certainly profitable to torture and then revealing some type of long-term goal. My point being that Suze is put in a position where she sort of has to tell him, like, hey, sorry, but you started this, now you have to finish it, even if you're going to die and other people are going to die. They don't really have a choice, and that's how it goes. It looks like Suze is going to maybe end the rebellion, but that's not really what she does. She sort of has to stoke the fires to make sure they keep going, and they do. And then all of them are killed, and thus not give out any information that doesn't need to be given out, which is, again, fascinating from a morality standpoint.
Well, I have to say, I actually ran the situation slightly differently from you. I suppose I need to give it another listen. I was thinking it was even more cold-hearted and Machiavellian than that, because my interpretation of the events was that Suze convinced Morabe and the others to lay down their arms, and then when she left the building, she gave the command to the Daleks to destroy the building they were holed up in anyway, because she knew that, as Michael said, if they were captured, if they were tortured, they could give out information. So, again, I'll need to re-listen to know which take is closer to the truth, but that's what my initial take was. Not that he was even agreeing to be a sacrifice for the greater good, but that just she made the call because there's no one else to make that call.
Regardless, to be honest, I can't remember which way it went either, but in the end, it really shows, I guess, the type of toll this is playing on Suze. Like what she has to do, the decisions that she has to make. Now, Kalendorf was involved in that conversation, but I can't remember to what extent. And I mean, to be fair, she's also trying to help save Kalendorf's plan anyway. So even if he has like issues with the implementation, he might not have disagreed with the ultimate conclusion. But point being, like I said, from a morality standpoint, it's just so fascinating.
It is an extremely complex situation. And if the rest of the series and the other three quote unquote seasons of Dalek Empire keep up this type of moral complexity, then I think we're in for a very exciting time listening to these. And we're not going to listen to all 4 seasons back to back to back, but as we mentioned previously, we are going to fairly quickly get through this 4th season on the whole. And so that's going to just add a lot of fun dynamics, because how are you supposed to root for the people who are basically saying, hey, you have to be enslaved for now, and maybe you'll die enslaved, but maybe your children will be free. It's such a hard situation to take that type of long game. It would be such a terrible situation to be in for anyone involved, except apparently the Daleks, because they're doing pretty successful. They're, in fact, leading in all fronts on this invasion so far against the Ortho Alliance.
Speaking of the Ortho Alliance, Alby, who we haven't seen yet, and he doesn't pop up until about 25 minutes into the episode. He is a member of the Ortho Alliance, so went rogue because he's much more concerned about trying to find Suze. And it's also worth mentioning, you actually do learn, and I will reference this last episode, but I was interested in a little more background and backstory on who Alby is, because we just didn't know a lot about him as a character. And he sort of has what I would say is maybe an expected background. He had sort of a iffy education, probably lived in the slums. He's not from Earth. How this wiki says he's from the Proximia Major. So I'll just say that's where he's from. So he was sort of a juvenile delinquent. He went to the army, as some kids do, but he got kicked out. I think he went to prison. And the Ortho Alliance apparently made a deal with him, like they're going to suspend his sentence if he agreed to join them. So he's sort of from a rough background, but he did fall in love with Suze while he was on an undercover mission. And that's why he's so, I guess, devoted to finding her. Keep in mind, it's been 6 months. And he and Pellan, the guy who was traveling with him, they were in, I believe, suspended animation as they were going to Garrison.
They apparently were lazy and they wanted to be conscious the entire time.
I can't blame them. As they get to the Garrison system, specifically toward the planet Gyria, they wake up, and by now, Pellan woke up before Alby did, and it's worth mentioning that even from the last episode, I don't want to say it's obvious, but to me it's sort of obvious that Pellan is under some type of control of the Daleks. I don't know to what extent or how exactly that works, but he's not exactly what I would say is a good faith agent.
No, it certainly was very suspicious that he woke up before Alby did, and Alby was questioning how that even happened, and he basically kind of just wrote it off. Now, depending on the way this episode ends, maybe none of that matters, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But certainly there's something more going on with Pellan that we have not heard yet. And Pellan, by the way, has gotten a lot of information from Alby, because Alby's just admitted, yeah, he was a secret agent. Hey, he was looking for, I believe he admitted he was looking for a man named Kalendorf, which was his initial mission that he was on Vega 62 in the first place. So Pellan has gotten a lot of information out of this.
And it's vice versa, because it's from Pellan that Alby learns that Suze is now known as the Angel of Mercy. And I mean, it's interesting to find out that the woman you love is going around saying, hey, be enslaved to the Daleks, bro, you'll love it. Certainly that's not the way the speech is given, but I mean, from an outside perspective, you can argue it sort of looks like it's implicit. But I did think it was interesting that, like I said, Alby doesn't appear until about 25 minutes in or about halfway through this episode. And Alby's story and Sue's story sort of converge on the planet Goria. Now, Goria is at the edge of the Daleks' advance into the galaxy. And it also mentions that it's a planet of a lot of fossil fuels. It's apparently one of Earth Alliance's largest, or used to be one of Earth Alliance's largest suppliers of fossil fuels. So we're talking about a very important planet as far as, I guess, galactic conquest goes. Used to be under the control of Earth Alliance, now it's under the control of the Daleks. And I have to say, listening to the audio, I kept picturing Kamina. That's how I sort of see the planet. But it sounds like, I mean, there's a bunch of oil rigs everywhere. It sounds like it's primarily a lot of rough, choppy waters. It sounds like a fun place to be. And it's there that we meet the leader of the planet, whose name or title is Highness. And he and his Daude, who is called Daude, and I was getting some major 1 million BC vibes from that. They go to the Daleks. Their people are enslaved right now, and they're having issues. A lot of people, I think they mentioned something about some sickness going around. And to be fair, these people don't seem exactly right either. They seem to have an issue controlling the laughter and giggling or talking to the Daleks, which may partially be an act. So I'm not entirely convinced it's entirely an act. It may just be like an actual issue they have. The point being, they have a sort of an amusing conversation with the Daleks. Amusing in that, well, like I said, the guy's nervous and he can't stop himself from nervously chuckling and laughing. Daleks totally do not care for that type of behavior. They request the Angel of Mercy come visit Goria to sort of inspire and give hope to the workers. She is in high demand.
Yeah, and to quell anything currently going on, because I believe there's at least a couple of oil rigs where the workers just stopped working, and the Daleks weren't happy about that.
See, and it's funny because theoretically the Daleks could just kill all of them, but the thing is they need the slave labor, and now that they have a possible solution in Suez, I mean, these people again have some type of leverage. They ask for the Angel of Mercy to come, and the Daleks say, okay, fine, we'll bring her here. So, I mean, in a way, they sort of got a small concession in that. And it doesn't go quite as smoothly as you might hope. Just before Suze can even land, she's sort of on a Dalek tower ship hovering above the planet. The problem is that the Earth Alliance is also, keep in mind, this is sort of on like the edge of the battlefield. The Earth Alliance is moving in, hoping to retake the planet. And there's also, like James said, there's already rebellion storing on the planet itself. There's actually sort of a two-pronged issue going on before Suze can even get there. And then, like I said, the story sort of converge here because Alby and Pellan land on, well, I say land on the planet. They sort of crash land in the water. It's actually a pretty good scene in which they are seen by a Dalek, but because communications on the ship are down, the Dalek can't ascertain if it's an enemy force or not. So there's sort of a fun little tense scene in which Alan is able to use, and he has some background in like breaking chords, and I mean, given the background that we suspect from him anyway, probably knows more about Dalek chords than most people would to begin with. We have a little fun sequence there, but main point being that they sort of crash land in the water. They eventually do make it to land following some mysterious coordinates, but they, potentially as expected, they do eventually get captured by the Daleks.
And it was interesting, if I'm remembering correctly, when they were passing by the Dalek ships during the crash landing, at one point, the Dalek command told the Daleks to not fire at them, or something to that effect, which gives more evidence of, and it's not going to be Alby unless it's playing a real house game, that Pellan is under some control of the Daleks at this point. And it was when they were in the cave right before they got captured where we learn that Suze apparently was working for the Rhinesburg Institute, which I'm not sure we heard the name in the first part of this series.
I actually think we did. I'm pretty sure we heard Ryan's book, but I don't think we learned that much information about it, which is why this stood out.
Perhaps we did. But either way, we knew at the very least the series of geologists, but apparently Rhinesburg has a major contract with the Earth Alliance Space Security Service, which is relating to something called Project Infinity. Now, this isn't August 2001. We happen to know that the name of the last story in this first season is entitled Project Infinity. And a lot of this seeding has been reminded me of Raw Down, which nothing reminds me of Raw Down. That's frankly, I didn't hate it, but it's pretty forgettable. But this is reminding me so much of the various times a certain document or paper was brought up by the commander of the fleet, and it played a very important role in the very last episode of that. And this is reminding me of a more long form of that. And it's not uncommon for Big Finish audios to do that. And I'm not sure why Radon is the first one that comes to mind of one that does that. But it is just fun, slow rolling these types of reveals. Because I'm not sure what Project Infinity is, but with a name like Project Infinity, it doesn't sound like the most healthy project. And it's certainly not something you'd want the Daleks to know anything about.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to learn about down the line, I imagine. Like James said, the last part of season 1 is called Project Infinity, and we just get a little bit of teaser stuff here. Now, I did find it interesting that once Sue's sort of, I'll say, trapped. Like I said, there's a lot of dangers going on the planet right now, so maybe they literally can't safely land, which makes sense. Like, even some landing pads are being sabotaged and blown up. Which, on a side note, despite the way this planet sounds, I mean, good for the people of Goria for trying to fight back. I mean, to our knowledge, they never even got visited by Kalendorf, so they would even be in on this whole long-term goal. So they have other type of like moral responsibility to fight back if they want. So by all means, do so. And it sounds like they're doing a decent job, to be honest. But my other point is that Zeus is up on this tower ship, where down below, Alby is on the planet, and of course, Alby came to this planet looking for Zeus. And they actually get to see each other through a sort of video conference call type thing. For just a brief moment, the Daleks on the ship and the Daleks down on the planet's surface set up a video call. Alby sees Sue sees Alby. I forget if they're able to actually talk much. I suspect they really aren't. They just see each other briefly, then the video link is cut off. And it's sort of, I would say, quite, since they can't really communicate much, I imagine it's quite a bittersweet moment. I mean, at least we got to briefly see her, but then things sort of go sideways again.
And it's also good that Sue's got to see him, which is maybe more important.
Yeah, I imagine you're going to say perhaps it's even the Daleks' plan for Suze to see Alby.
Yeah, because certainly something was going on there. On both sides, Suze and Alby were wondering why that call even kind of happened, in a way. I don't know, there was something about the whole framing of what happened that seemed odd to both Suze and Alby. And I've been theorizing from the beginning that the Daleks have some longer goal in mind with Suze. And certainly that's something I'm going to be paying close attention to, because it's one of the more interesting background things going on so far in this series, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that, of course, we know and Alby told Pellan that he loves Suze. That's why he's doing this. He just loves Suze. We also learn that Suze loves Alby. After the video link cuts out, she tells the Daleks like, "Hey, I just saw that man. He's a man I loved and I thought was dead." So that makes this even more tragic that they both have such strong feelings for each other. And I have to tell you, I'm not hopeful that this is going to go well. I mean, even ignoring the end of this, I mean, it's just a bad situation all around.
Is a Dalek invasion? Perhaps that is a very safe assumption to make. Plus, the fact that it's apparently very comfortable taking over a long place of time, because not only did this take place 6 months after the end of the first part, right after the rebellion finishes on Garia, we have a 2-month, maybe 3-month skip to the ending scene of the story. So the story's not been afraid to take over a vast amount of time.
Yeah, and what we see is the Earth Alliance along with the Garian robbers. I assume it's mostly the Earth Alliance who's able to fight back the Daleks. Daleks were given orders to fight them back as fast as possible, even though at that point they were outnumbered and outgunned against the Earth Alliance. But there's a scene in which the Daleks kill Highness, who was, of course, the leader of Garia, in some type of royal system, some type of monarchy. The leadership passes on to the Daude, named Daude. She's given a broadcast. She's supposed to make a broadcast to her people. The Daleks wanted her to tell the people to, hey, give up your rebellion. We just killed your leader. Give up. Let us take control back. I do respect Daude's position. But message to the robbers on the planet, hey, fight on, I believe is what she said, which the Daleks did not want her to say. Now, it sounds like they did give up, but it ultimately doesn't matter because, like we said, the Earth Alliance is coming in anyway, and they do take back the planet. Unfortunately, in that struggle, Alby, I think he loses, both legs?
Yeah, there was an explosion that he was involved in, and he ends up, we learn, losing both his legs, and they are being replaced, or have been replaced at the end of the episode by, well, I'm assuming mechanical legs. I'm assuming they would have pretty advanced prosthetics at this point in time, so perhaps it's not as bad as it could be, but I'm sure he would have preferred to have his own legs, and not replacements.
Yeah, and the end of this, like James said, there's like a skip of either a month or 2 months or something like that. I mean, if you lose two legs, it doesn't take like a week to fix it. Well, like, I guess it could. But my point being, there's like another time skip here. And we see, like we saw, the Earth Alliance currently has control of Gyria, though it doesn't last because the Daleks are coming back and making another push on the planet. Out there is going to stay with the people and try to fight, even though, again, Daleks are talking about unaware, so they're going to get killed in this conflict. There's almost not really a question about it in my mind. There's not enough people from the Earth Alliance there. On a side note, there should probably put more people there if this is like really on the forefront of the battle, but I guess they have their own stuff they're dealing with. When you're talking about like galactic conquest, it's not nearly the same thing as some type of like land conflict. There's a lot more angles you have to consider. But Alby and Palin are able to leave the planet. Unfortunately, they ran into what seems to be a Earth Alliance tower liner. And it's worth mentioning that I think they're in the Dalek ship. So the Earth Alliance may consider them to be enemies. They may consider that, hey, there's probably Daleks in this ship. And I forget if there's some type of communication issue, but I feel like Alby isn't able to accurately say, hey, guys, we're on your side, landing on a ship, please don't shoot us. Unfortunately, when they leave the ship, they land on the Star Line and they leave the ship, it sounds like both of them get shot, and that's where the story ends. So, part of me would be surprised if they just killed off Alby like this, because, hey, in a situation like this, you can die instantly and it's over. So part of me would be surprised. Another part of me would think, well, hey, Alby was safe for the first two episodes. He would seem like he's one of the main characters, so maybe he isn't that. But here's what we do know. Imagine the narrator earlier. And there's some like strange phrasing in the first episode where it wasn't clear who the narrator was. And it sounds like it's possibly or probably is Sue's. So I have to admit, I'm still not entirely convinced myself. Like, the whole thing is that they sort of use a third-person narration. It might be they're trying to, if it's Sue's, it's trying to divorce themselves from their own actions. Because it talks about like, oh, how painful stuff was for Sue's and saying, that was, when I made that choice. That's when it reveals the narrator is. But it's just sort of a strange framing, or I guess strange phrasing for some of the narration.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned it because until it revealed that, I was thinking maybe the narration was from an older Daughter. And I will say, Highness and Daughter, to me, felt like they were taken straight out of the Holy Terror with the way that they were acting in front of the Dalek. It felt very Robert Sorman-esque in how they were dealing with the situation because of, again, all the laughing, all the giggling. And part of it was being put on. I'm not convinced all of it was. And basically, it seemed like it was just to fuck with him, which, if they're the leaders of the planet and the dogs hypothetically need the leaders alive to keep the people more placated, I guess they have a little leverage to do that. I'm not sure now's the time.
I was going to say, it may not be prudent.
It certainly wasn't prudent for Highness since he was destroyed by the Daleks. But either way, yeah, the narration's interesting. I'm sure we're going to learn more about it. She seems like she's really disassociating herself from what the action she took was, to a point where I'm wondering if she did things that were even worse in the future, and I'm sure she did.
I mean, to be fair, Claudia feels guilty about this whole thing. If she's thrown into the equivalent of the Hague later on by the Earth Alliance, maybe she's just really like, God, I did some things back then,
And I wouldn't think either that Alby is dead. Although if they did kill Alby after this way, it would be a sign to the listeners that, hey, anyone can die, be ready. It's the equivalent of certain deaths in A Song of Ice and Fire that kind of prime the reader that anybody can die.
I was surprised when both Arya and Sansa took out Littlefinger like that. It's beautiful, beautiful writing.
I'm not talking about that disgrace. That Alby thing, that was just terrible. There are people who liked it. They're wrong. It was terrible. I don't know what to tell you. Read the books. The books, unfinished, will always be better than the finished show. To me, that's indisputable. But since it's indisputable, there's no point in continuing talking about it until we get to our chapter-by-chapter analysis.
Yeah, and before we do any chapter-by-chapter analysis of A Song of Ice and Fire. And before we talk about our thoughts on this one, did you want to jump into the whole timeline thing?
I shall. As listeners know, the TARDIS Wiki has a personal timeline for each Doctor, including the extensive extended media, ranging from the comic books, comic strips, Big Finish, and BBC audio, the multiple book ranges, and everything in between. Doctor Who canon, insofar as it actually has one, is a jumbled mess and has been forever. So I just like to see where the stories we're listening to fit into the universe as a whole, as continuity and the narrative timeline has always been of interest to me. And along with personal timelines for each Doctor, it also has a species timeline for the Daleks, and that's where we're getting the information we have today. And we discussed in Invasion of the Daleks how basically all these are going to be back to back to back, and that's pretty true for this case. The story that takes place right before this one is the story that took place right after Invasion of the Daleks, that being the best joke I ever told, which was a story featuring the Sixth Doctor and Maul from the Big Finish release Short Trips Dalek Empire, which came out December 2006. Which, of course, is one of the Big Finish Short Trip story collections, and has multiple Doctors who don't even appear in it due to the fact that it's more focused on the Dalek Empire than it is about Doctor Who stories. I wouldn't be surprised, in fact, if the Sixth Doctor and Maul were side characters who don't even appear much in that story. Nevertheless, the story that takes place right after this is, well, the next story in Dalek Empire Series 1, Death to the Daleks, which came out in October 2001. But that is not what we are going to be talking about next. But before we let you know what that is, our final thoughts on this story.
I thought this was pretty solid. Now, Invasion of the Daleks did a nice job setting things up, and it was certainly a perfectly solid opening. And it's sort of hard to judge a very first episode of series like this. I will say I enjoyed this one more. I thought they did a really good job. I thought the way that they sort of converged stories between Alby and Sue's coming, well, not even coming together. I thought they did a good job bringing them sort of dovetailing the stories into the same location. And I thought this was a lot of fun. There's a lot of complicated and complex morality going on that I think a lot of people who watch, especially classic Doctor Who, would come in and really enjoy something like this. Like James referenced Day of the Daleks, which I think is a very apt comparison. And I think this has a lot of things going for it. Like even the smaller characters like Doughty, who only have one or two scenes they even appear in, they still come out quite strongly. And overall, I just had a lot of fun with this. I think it sets up some things down the line, like Project Infinity, and more into what Suze's character is. I think there's a lot of interesting things coming up, and I just thought it did a good job, I guess, bringing that stuff forward.
And I would mostly agree. I did enjoy Highness and Doubt as much because they seemed a little out of place, in my opinion, in the story, at least in terms of the attitude. Like I said, they would have felt much more in place to me in something like the Holy Terror. But even with that minor quibble, everything else about this I really enjoyed. It took halfway through the story for Alby and Palin to even pop up, so it gave room to breathe for the us being able to catch up with Susan and Kalendorf and see what they've been doing the last 6 months, with some flashbacks to why they were doing this and whatnot, and to go conversations between Susan and Kalendorf, where even though they are working together in this plan to eventually do a rebellion, Kalendorf still is seemingly very happy with even what Suze is doing, even with that going on. Because keep in mind, Kalendorf didn't ask to come, Suze asked for him. Now, I'm sure he understands the reasons why, but the thing is, besides having psychic conversations, they can't actually talk about any of this. So either they're having a lot of psychic conversations all the time, or they're just kind of needing to roll with it the best they
I was
can.
gonna say, they might just have to hope they're on the same page.
But either way, it has a lot of more quandaries in it, and I'm quite enjoying so far this spin-off, and I'm enjoying it more than I thought I would, honestly. I think these characters are actually quite interesting, and you can actually, if not relate to them, understand where they're coming from. And I'm quite excited to see how things move forward. And I'm especially excited to see how things move forward after this series and how season 2 starts, to know if we'll be following any of the same characters at all, because I don't know. Maybe we will, maybe we won't be. Especially if the time keeps moving like it has been, maybe it wouldn't even be possible. Or maybe it'll take place during these events, Farley and other characters, they could do all types of things beyond my imaginings. And I'm just looking forward to see how that goes from here on out.
Yeah, and by all means, if you've listened to this one, let us know what you thought about it up to this point. Obviously, avoiding any spoilers down the line. But like I said, I think this has a lot of promise. And well, like James said, I'm actually enjoying this a little more than I sort of personally thought I would myself. So certainly down the line, I expect good things to come. Probably not for humanity, but hey, the Daleks have a good thing going for them. But like I said, if you have any comments or anything, just reach out to us either on Twitter at Brothers Mahoney, or you can just comment down below here on YouTube. And hey, like and subscribe. But anything else before I go on to what's next?
No, I do not have anything else. So, what do we have coming up next time?
Well, next up, we have another Big Finish release. This one, though, being, I'll say outside of the main range. I have no idea if it was initially in the main range. Maybe you would know more. But it's Last of the Titans, which is a 30-minute audio, just 30 minutes, starring Sylvester McCoy. So it's starring the 7th Doctor. So Last of the Titans, 30 minutes, Sylvester McCoy from January 2001. And being only 30 minutes, I'm actually really curious. Because, I mean, down the line, we see them play with that format a bit, some shorter stories. I mean, they have the whole short trips line. This would be the first, like, really short one we listen to. So I'm actually sort of curious as to how it's going to go.
Yeah, no, I'm quite interested to see how that goes. Any Sylvester McCoy, and it's been a while for Sylvester McCoy, so I look forward to that. Especially with it being only 30 minutes there, it's make it very interesting to talk about. But that will be for the future.
Indeed it is. And as always, thanks for listening. This has been the Brothers Mahoney. I'm Michael,
And I am James.
and we hope everyone has a nice and Dalek-free night.